I'm meteorologist Evan Stewart here at 13 News Now, WVEC in Norfolk, Virginia. It is September 7th, Thursday. Time now for another tropical update, and there's a lot going on here as we near the peak of hurricane season. That is September 10th. So we're just a few days away, and we have a major hurricane brewing in the Atlantic. That is Hurricane Lee. If you just watched our last video and you haven't been keeping up, Lee is now a Category 4 storm with winds of 130 miles per hour, and it'll likely become a Category 5, maybe even later tonight, if not during the day tomorrow. Now, the thinking here at our station is that there's about an 80 to 90% chance that this stays offshore of the mid-Atlantic, likely offshore of Florida. Questions come later into the period as to whether there's some impacts along parts of New England. That is looking a little more likely. The potential is certainly there that this storm could have some significant impacts for the Canadian Maritimes or the northeast part of the U.S., but at least for the mid-Atlantic, we are saying about an 80 to 90% chance that this is going to stay offshore. Still uncertain, though, how far offshore. If it's just 100 miles, that would be a big difference than if it was 500 miles offshore. If it's a little bit closer, if it's just 100 miles offshore, that'll still give some significant weather impacts through the mid-Atlantic. So let's take a look at the storm right now, still east of the Lesser Antilles, still in that zone of about 8 to 9 days away from making it to the U.S. coastline. And this is just based on the average speed of tropical storms and hurricanes over the years. So still more than a week away and a lot of time to watch it. And we have Margot that is out there towards the Cabo Verde Islands. Was a tropical depression, is now a tropical storm, will likely become a hurricane, but it's going to remain out here in the middle part of the Atlantic for a good while. There are some things that might come interesting, 10, 12 days down the line if it's still lingering out there and just spinning around in the Atlantic. But of course, our big concern is Hurricane Lee, as we mentioned, now a Category 4 storm as of the 5 o'clock advisory from the National Hurricane Center. This is a look at the enhanced satellite. We can see a lot of the structure of the storm better when we start to adjust the colors a little bit. And you can see this is a very concentric storm. Maybe a little bit of wind shear here on the northwestern corner where we're not seeing quite the development. But again, this is a massive storm, a very powerful storm with those strong winds and a very concentric eye. And notice that eye is almost a perfect circle. There's very little to inhibit this storm of continuing to strengthen the Category 5 strength. And that's what the National Hurricane Center is showing. And notice how large it is. This is the width of that storm. And when I advance it here, the cone is here. The storm is this big. So the cone is where we think the center of the storm will go. That doesn't mean that areas outside of that cone won't feel the impact, because we saw the storm is this big, covers a very large area. So even as it moves off towards the northwest, it'll likely grow as a Category 5. Lesser Antilles, Puerto Rico, again, even if the storm is, this large, feeling some of those fringe impacts, certainly dangerous water conditions for Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, even over into the Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas, even as soon as tomorrow, likely feeling those strong impacts through the Lesser and Greater Antilles, and then probably into Friday or likely Saturday, certainly feeling the impacts of the swells here through the Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas, and by Sunday or Monday, even here through the mid-Atlantic region. So this is where it is through Tuesday afternoon, 2 o'clock, Category 4 storm. There are usually fluctuations in tropical systems. When they become this large, it's hard for them to maintain that strength of 165 mile per hour winds. There are things called eye wall replacement cycles where the eye wall starts to collapse and a new one develops. We see that very, very often with these strong systems. And again, it's just very tough to maintain that strength for a length of time, but still talking about a Category 4 storm here east of the Turks and Caicos. So this is how it looks as we go out beyond next Tuesday. This takes us through next Saturday. So not this Saturday, but next Saturday, the 16th. This is the European run of the ensembles. We've talked about them before, how we just tweak the forecast a little bit, or the initial conditions around the storm, or maybe say the storm is a little stronger or a little weaker. So basically it gives us 50 different scenarios that could happen with Lee. You'll notice they're all pretty consistent through the cone, which is what we would expect, but then there is a little bit of some variance. There are a couple of these models that bring it closer to the coastline, like this one. Again, most of them keep it offshore. That's what we like to see. That's why we have that high level of confidence that this will stay offshore. But what happens if this tweak, this run is a little more, is the right one? Or what if it's this one? It could be this one, it could be this one, but you know, that's why we can't say that you turn your back on this storm and just say, all right, we know it's going to move offshore. We don't have to worry about it, because we can't say that at this point. Again, this is taking us into the middle and the end of next week. That's the European model. This is the American model. European models run about 50 times. There are 50 members of that ensemble, 30 here. So you're still seeing a few that bring it closer to the coast. This one here curves it. These come here a little bit farther to the west. So what is that? Maybe 4 out of 80 are saying that they could have a closer run towards the U.S. East Coast. Again, that's why we can't say we're totally done with this storm yet. And I do want to go back here to the European models and show you that while we expect it to stay off the U.S. East Coast, look what happens here. I can move this down up towards New York, Boston, Nova Scotia, Maine. You can see the models are sort of focusing here on parts of the Northeast. So, well, we might be able to breathe quite a bit easier here based on this current forecast for the Mid-Atlantic, certainly for Florida and the Southeast, areas from New Jersey, certainly up towards New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Canadian Maritimes. Certainly could see some impacts here as we head towards the end of next weekend. And I'll advance this here and show you that the American model doesn't go quite as far. It's a little bit slower with the system. That's why these models don't carry it even farther. But again, notice there's some curves here. There are some curves that might come a little bit later, so there could be some impacts there through parts of New England. Again, that's a long ways off, more than a week away from this weekend. So, well, of course, we'll continue to watch this system throughout Friday and this weekend and have updates on air and online.